Hello class, in this video we will learn about assessment for administration. Each year, students in Maryland schools are assessed for their ability to meet learning standards. The areas of assessment vary depending on the grade level. Elementary and middle school students are currently assessed on reading, math, and science. High school students are assessed on algebra, government, science, and English. For this task, you will view the Maryland State Department of Education's School Improvement website, mdk12.org, and examine how data is collected and displayed. You will search subgroups based on race to understand information that is used by schools to analyze both school and student performance. This website is provided by the State Department of Education and has a wealth of information that you could use to improve your understanding of assessment and to ultimately improve your instruction. So one area that we will focus on will be to analyze the data for the MSA, because this is the data that you'll have access to for elementary education students. And then here's some high school data, which at some point in your career you want to study and understand. And you may ask yourself, well, why do I need to know about high school data if I'm teaching elementary school? Well, the high school data can give you a sense of, well, what are students struggling with once they leave the elementary level? And this can ultimately give you information about where you should focus on certain skills that students seem to struggle with as they move through the school system. As a professional, you'll likely become to understand that students struggle with something like math, and ninth grade algebra is an issue. So what skills can you focus on at the elementary level to help students in the future? So we'll switch over to LiveText so we can see the assignment details next, and then we'll come back to this website and learn how to drill down to the data that we need to access. Once you're in LiveText and you have access to the assignment task, you'll see what you need to do step by step. So the first thing you'll do is select a county within Maryland, and this could be any county, although you may want to select the county where you do your field placement because you have a certain feel for the schools, because you spent 20, maybe 30 hours in those schools, so you have a good idea about the context, which may make the data richer to you. You'll determine an assessment that you want to examine, so you can do math, science, or reading. You'll examine achievement data for subgroups in the two specific schools that you select. So you'll be comparing the data from one school to the other, as well as throughout the county. So you can use a Word document here or an Excel document, because you'll need to create some charts. At some point you have to come up with some questions about the data, and you'll need to be able to make charts so that you can support what you say. And then this part just tells you how to examine the data and then to compare the assessment data for the identified schools that you have. And then we have some questions as we go down further. So you have these 5 questions under number 6. And once you've read through that and you've made your comparisons, so spend a lot of time looking at the data, looking for patterns, and we'll talk about this momentarily, but spend some time in the data so that when you come to these questions, they'll be a little easier for you to understand. Now, the final part here, this last question says, select data from the chart and create a graph to explain and illustrate the 2 questions in your analysis. So earlier in your analysis, you'll come up with some questions that you have based on the data that you select. And then you'll need to have the question supported by a graph that you create, selecting some data that you saw in which you research. So make sure that you're using data to support your questions and what you think the answer might be. And then this says you can use more than one chart. So make sure that you spend a lot of time in the data and that you use that data to support what you write as you go through the assignment. Now we'll switch back over to the website with the data, and then we'll take a look at how you do this process. So let's switch over to mdk12.org, and we want to select MSA because that's the data we'll look at for this assignment. And then over to your right, you'll see 3 options here. So let's select school. Now here are all of the counties listed in the state of Maryland, and I'll just select Wacomico. You can select other counties if you like. And then all of the middle schools as well as elementary schools are listed, so you can select the school where you're currently placed. Let's say we select East Salisbury. And so for this particular school, I'll be able to come here, and this question, how did our school and subgroups perform this year? So we can select reading, and then we can scroll through and take a look at the data. And as your math teacher would want, make sure you go and look at the key so you can know exactly what's going on in the graph. And you'll notice here, gray is basic, this green is proficient, and the orange is advanced. And a quick look at this graph tells me that not too many students are in the advanced level, which is where we probably want all students to be. But we'll notice that if we were looking at a different type of graph, like a curve of this information, this green part would probably be the spike, and then the orange would be out on the corners, and then the gray would be out on the left corner. So it will look something like this. If you can follow the mouse, it would go up and then come back over here, sort of like that normal curve, distribution curve that you learned about in your stats course. But looking at it this way gives us a different picture. Now, these asterisks, you make sure that you read this part, because it'll tell you that they're special indicators. The number of students is small, so it's not a lot to report. Now, in other schools, this may change. So some schools may have more of one particular category than another. But now we study that data, we ask questions, and then you can also switch over to data table. And then the table gives you more information, and you can see what's going on with the numbers in here. And you can see our fractions, so it makes it a little bit clearer. And then here's some questions that you want to answer. Now, you don't need to write these questions down in terms of submitting it, but they can guide you in terms of analyzing the data in the chart. So this first question, what percent of students are performing at the proficient level? Easy to see. What percent are not? Another easy thing to see. Another question that you might want to ask that may not be as obvious is, well, why are there students not performing at the proficient level? So that's not on this list, but that's the kind of process that should be going through your head as you look at this data. And then, so do those questions, analyze the data, and after you've done that for one school, you'll switch back. And then you'll look at another school. Let's say we look at Northwestern Elementary. And then we'll go here again. Now, you can go through all of these categories to get as much information as you need. So I'm just clicking on one just so you see how to do the process. And then we can click on reading again, and make sure whatever you select, if you selected reading for your schools, do that in both. If you want to look at both math and reading, feel free to do that. Now we scroll down here and notice that it looks slightly different. There's less gray in this particular school, which we know is the basic level. So there are more students out of the basic level. And then right here, still, though, we have most students falling within that green, the proficient level. And advanced is a little bit more over here, so you can, that's a comparison you would want to make. So we're looking at Northwestern Elementary versus the first school we looked at. And that's what you want to do. You want to select a county. You want to select 2 schools within that county, and then you want to look at either math data, science data, reading, whatever data you want to compare. You want to look at that for both schools, and then you want to start to answer some questions and make some observations. And again, you have a set of questions here to guide you. You don't have to answer these particular questions for the assignment, because everything that you need to do for the assignment is in live text. But as you're going through the data, this will be good to look at so you have an idea of what's going on. So again, we can click on the data table, and it'll give us a different view. Go back to our horizontal bar. And another thing that you want to do is to make sure you look at all the categories carefully. Like right here, it says free and reduced meals, limited English proficient. So those are your students that don't speak English as their first language. In this school, the data isn't as robust because there are less than 10 students to report. So anything that would be reported could be skewed. So if you had 10 students and they all did fairly well, it would look like all LEP students are doing great, so it's hard to report. And the same thing in reverse is true. If those 10 students, if most of them are doing poorly, you would say all LEP students are doing poorly. So that's why numbers 10 and below aren't as significant as the numbers for the other groups. So the more students you look at, the more data you look at, the more you can rely on what those numbers are speaking to you. So we'll come back to where we started here. How did our school subgroups perform this year? Now, to get a more direct comparison, because we do need to select race and ethnicity, that's part of your assignment. So we'll take a look at these two. So again, you click on reading, and now we see some charts that do some comparisons. And these line graphs tell us over time, it gives us a picture of what's going on. And so we know that for these two groups here, they started out apart. And somehow the group that was performing lower started trending up, which is a good thing. And the group that's up here, they were doing well in the beginning, and they didn't fall completely off, but they sort of veered down a little bit. And then now these groups in this particular area are closer together. So there's less of an achievement gap here in 2014 than there was in 2011. So an obvious question here would be, what happened to make that work? What was going on in the school to make it so that the African American students started doing better? And whatever's going on there, that's something we would want to know so the whole county could have that, because we may look at another school and students in these subgroups may not be doing as well at a different school in the same county as they were in this particular school. So what's going on in the school? That's always a question. Is it the leadership? Is it the resources? And that's when you would need to know the context. So that's why if you select a school where your placement has occurred, it'll give you a better sense of how to answer these questions and make sense of the data, because if you were at this school, you might know why this starts to trend up, because you would know who the teachers are and how the teachers respond to students, what they do in the classroom. You would know the principal. You would know about any programs the principal has going on. You would know about how the students respond to the instruction, and you would have a richer context. And that speaks to using two types of data when you make decisions. So there's quantitative data where the numbers are, and this is the quantitative part that we're looking at now. It's data that you can give a test for, collect the numbers, put them in, a chart like Excel, or use some other data crunching program, and then come out with these charts. That's the quantitative side of it. And that data is important to have. And then there's a qualitative side of it, which is a different type of data. It's not based on numbers. It's based on that context. It's based on knowing people, knowing students, knowing neighborhoods, knowing school environments. And so the quantitative side works with or complements the qualitative side. And the reverse is true as well. The qualitative complements the quantitative. So you'll hear some arguments for one or the other. But I like to use both, and a lot of people like to use both, because if you only rely on hard number data, you might miss something. And if you only rely on qualitative data, you also might miss something. So using both is better than one over the other. Now, some situations require one over the other in certain aspects, but for what you want to do, you want to always think about, well, how can I balance both? And that's a good way to approach using data in your classroom. So you have lots of different data to think about. Now, right now, we're looking at some state level data, but if we wanted to look at other types of data, so you can look at statewide data, you can look at county level data, you can look at school level data, and then you can drill all the way down into classroom level data. Now, the classroom level data is what you have more control over, because it's the assignments you do, it's the little quizzes you give on Friday, it's projects, it's the day-to-day interaction with students, it's seeing how students respond when you're teaching, how to respond when they're working with other students. And so all that kind of data is unique to each teacher, because you're there all day with students. And so you have a greater understanding of why they do what they do in terms of understanding the content. So that data is very, very important. And then the broader picture of the data is also important. And so knowing all these different sources of data will make you a more complete, complex teacher in that sense. And that's what you want to do in this assignment, is to use the context of where you are along with the data that you see, and then explore and go through different schools, and it'll give you a different sense of what students are doing. And if you have a question, let's say about resources, of course, if we were to select Worcester and we go to certain schools, we would see a certain type of performance. And if we selected a different school in the same county on the other end of that same county, then you might see a slightly different performance. And you could put those into categories of different types of resources, different types of areas. So there's a lot that you can do with the data. So make sure that you study it carefully. And when you're ready, you come back, you'll be able to go through this process to create your document. Now, make sure your document is neat and organized, and be sure that you also take a look at the assessment that will be used for you, because it tells you exactly what's expected. There's an exceeds and there's a developing. So make sure you read those categories in the rubric so you'll know what's expected.